Welcome to the Alameda County Water Board special board meeting of November 16th, 2022. At slightly after 4 p.m. This time we have an opportunity for a roll call.
Directors Sethy,
Here.
Akbari,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Wong, and Weed.
Here. So 4 board members are here. I'm sure the 5th is due shortly. Let me turn it over to the general manager to make comments because we do have members calling in online. So
sure. Thank you, President Weed, and we can do our salute to the flag in just a moment. First of all, on behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in the special board meeting of the ACWD Board. My name is Ed Stevenson. I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda, presentation materials, and other materials are available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. And that completes my housekeeping remarks.
thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God. Thank you. We have an opportunity for public comments on matters which are related to this special meeting. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board? I see no hands raised on the those in attendance online nor in the audience, so we will close the public comment section. And it's a relatively short agenda item, so let me read the item 4, which is Water Resources Planning Workshop. This is the second in a series of workshops planned for calendar years 2022 and 2023 that will focus on planning for long-term management of the district's water resources in the face of climate change, evolving regulations, declining availability of water supplies, new water supply alternatives, and other factors using an integrated resources planning approach. This workshop will specifically include the following topics: review of recent work leading to the development of a new water resources master plan, including past efforts and current activities. Second, draft findings of the purified water feasibility evaluation. Third, background of the integrated resources planning IRP process and the district's implementation of the 1995 IRP. And finally, discussion of gap assessments, priorities, and expectations for a new water resources master plan. Ask the general manager if there's anyone who would like to recognize who's in attendance for this workshop.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, President Weed. I am happy that we have joining us here in person the General Manager of Union Sanitary District, Paul Eldridge, and Raymond Chow of Union Sanitary District 2. Obviously very interested in some of the materials we'll be talking about this evening. I think online also we have a member of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, so they're more than welcome to chime in at any time. So it's great to have you all on board. They may or may not be sticking around for all of the workshop, but I'm very happy to have them here. And with that, I think we can turn it over to our Director of Water Resources to kind of get us started.
Please, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We're glad to be here tonight for the second workshop. We've got a few staff here present as well, in addition to our special guest that I'd like to just mention. Mr. Thomas Nizer, the Water Supply and Planning Manager, will be leading our presentation today. And we have Kelsey Oshiro joining us here as well, I believe online, to provide a part of the presentation as well. We're glad to have them both participating today. We have Michelle Walden, Groundwater Resources Manager, and Ava Laser, hydrogeologist, also here in support of the planning workshop. And I believe Stephanie Nevins, our water use efficiency supervisor, has tuned in as well. So thanks to all of them for being here. And so tonight we've got just A refresher slide here at the very beginning on the Water Resources Planning Workshop Series that Director Weed just covered. The effort here, and tonight's workshop, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Nizer to cover what we're going to do on the agenda today. We've got also in the packet a reference slide that includes many, many acronyms, some of which we'll use today, some of which we won't. And that's just there for your reference as well. So, Mr. Nizer, go for it.
Thank you. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm just having a little quasi allergy thing going on. So excuse me. Thank you, Ms. Heides. Breaking down in detail introduction and purpose for this evening, we want to update the board on developments in our long-range water supply planning updates. We're shooting for a 2025 master plan update. And we want to, I don't know, Mary, is it possible to move the, it's going to get in my, thank you. I want to obtain board input on scoping efforts for proceeding with a master plan update. And I'll note for the board, we're trying to use the generic term water resources master plan versus integrated resource plan, which is the methodology and the name of our existing plan, the IRP, just for the time being until we progress into really scoping and how we plan to proceed with our update. And there's a few items that I have which are sort of, they're going to be a little background, repeat information for the board, some information which this board has seen in recent weeks. We do have some members of the public, so I will go through that material, but I'll try and move quickly because we have a few guests here who are particularly interested in the purified water study, which we'll have shortly into this presentation. So where have we been? So this board has been involved in a lot of water supply alternative planning efforts starting around 2014, 2015 during the last drought. And in 2018, the board was really considering three major projects: the Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion, water reuse from a study that was done with our partners in 2015, as well as a optional buy-in to the Delta Conveyance project at that time. And what we were looking at is in 2018 is a lot of tremendous uncertainty in development of legislation and regulations, which were going to have significant consequences on ACWD's water supply portfolio. So significant that it was hard to know what we were going to be needing as far as water supply enhancements. And so those projects in particular were the proposed water fix or Delta Conveyance project, the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, which is substantially impacting the availability of imported water, and water use efficiency standards, which were stemming from the governor's Make Conservation a California Way of Life legislation. This is a graphic that we used in 2018 to sort of depict the road ahead. And in 2018, we were standing right at the bottom at the beginning of this road, looking at a cloud bank ahead of us to represent the uncertainties that we were facing. Fast forward to where we are now, 2022, we are square in the middle of that cloud bank. The Delta Water Quality Control Plan is under active negotiations. It's getting clearer every month where it's headed, and is helping us resolve a lot of the uncertainty in our future water supply. But there's still quite a bit of uncertainty there. The water fix project did not proceed as planned and is now under a new permutation, the Delta Conveyance program project. So we're sort of restarting much of that work. On the positive side, the water demands for the future, which are dictated by the water use efficiency legislation, we know most of what we need to know. We know 85% of that. So we have a lot more clarity on what we need to do as far as conservation and what we can expect for future water demands. So since 2018, it's a lot of time's gone by. Rather than waiting around for decisions on those, staff has made itself productive in other ways, in addition to monitoring and participating in these ongoing efforts, which are done at a state level and state and local level for the Los Vaqueros expansion. We've really been focused on non-dependent work efforts. By that, I mean things that are not conditional on the outcome of those statewide determinations. So these are elements that are needed for our updated water supply master plan. And these include a combination of technical studies and developing new tools. Some of those projects include the series of water resources planning board workshops in 2018 with the board here. During that time, we refined assumptions and planning policies that have been in place since 1995, really to reflect current affairs. One of those was to reflect the governor's orders for conservation, which would have us having a level of service below 90%. We've been requested to do 20% and later 15% conservation and drought response. The district has an existing policy of 90% level of service. Getting those two things to sort of jive and figure out how to make those work together is pretty important. We've added some policy objectives as well to accommodate things like climate change and resiliency, specifically towards new information that we have about the vulnerability of the Delta, as well as the rest of our water supply system, as well as what we call future flexibility. These are sort of conditions that have evolved since the 90s and are really more at the core of a lot of the project work that's being done on the water supply alternatives that are out there. And we also requested permission to consider pumping the Niles Cone groundwater basin temporarily during extreme droughts to levels below -5 feet. -5 feet is the level that was dictated in the 1995 IRP. And the reason why that works is because of the success that the district has had on cleanup of the basin, the success of the Quarry Lakes program and the ARP pumping, having brought desal online since the 1995 IRP. We've seen a much more rapid cleanup of the basin, which gives us greater flexibility to exercise it for freshwater storage. And we've also discussed revisions to recycled water planning. Prior to this in 1995, the IRP did make plans to proceed with up to 2,000 acre feet of non-potable recycled water. That's the classic purple pipe. And to reflect the evolution of technology, the regulations, evolving regulations, as well as changing demands for water, this board unanimously agreed that we should abandon the idea of non-potable recycled water and instead focus on potable reuses. There may have been one abstainer in there. I actually don't remember the record, but this was agreed to by the balance of the board. We also completed a water efficiency master plan that did two things for us. It established our water use efficiency abilities, what we anticipate for per capita efficiency, which is needed to know how we would comply with the evolving legislation, water use efficiency legislation, as well as to help us identify the remaining potential for additional conservation that the district may choose to invest in as part of a water supply portfolio. We've complied with SIGMA and urban water management plans over the past 4 years. We joined the LVE Joint Powers Authority at its formation in October last year. We've developed a new groundwater model, which has more capability to do analyses for changing conditions associated with climate change, as well as many other benefits. We're 20% of the way through the AMI installation. We're currently working on analytic tools that will help us use that'll allow us to use the data from AMI for implementation and studies of water use efficiency and use analyses by our customers. Fisheries programs, we've completed all construction at this point. As of about a week ago, the final construction in channel finished, and we are in the process of preparing for startup testing. We've completed development of our adaptive management plan in compliance with our biological opinion. A lot of work still, tremendous amount of work that's gone on, and an unknown amount of work that still lays in front of us on this one. And we are nearing completion of our climate adaptation plan, which this board saw presented just about 4 weeks ago. And finally, we have a draft final purified water feasibility evaluation, which we are going to preview here tonight. And to remind the folks who are not aware, the purified water feasibility evaluation is a recycled water concept. It's a critical part of our water supply planning, as recycled water is currently one of the proposed future water supplies for ACWD. We've been, as I mentioned a moment ago, we've been modifying our plans for recycled water development continuously to adapt, as is called for in integrated planning. And tonight to present the updated study is Kelsey Oshiro from the Water Resources Group. And I will hand it over to Kelsey, who's online. And as mentioned, we have a few participants in that study here in the audience this evening from Union Sanitary District, as well as the SFPUC online. So Kelsey.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Nizer. Yes, thanks so much for having us. So before we jump into the review of our draft results, just wanted to give a little bit of background information on our study. So our current Purified Water Feasibility Evaluation, or PWFE, is being completed with our partner agencies who's with us today. Thank you again. So SFPUC and USD. Our consultant for this project is Woodard & Curran, and they have sub-consultants Linnotech, Trestle Technologies, and Data Instincts on board as well. And this PWFE is based on numerous previous purified water studies completed by ACWD and USD. And in 2017, the Bay Area Regional Reliability, or a BAR study, did include creating an intertie with SFPUC, and that's why they are involved in this current study here today. And next slide, please. So a brief overview of our scope of work. So we are aiming to identify a recommended purified water alternative, which also includes a high-level cost estimate. And we also want to complete a draft report that will submit to USBR's Title 16 funding eligibility list, as well as future submittal to the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Recycling Funding Program. And next slide, please. Before we jump into the details, just a friendly reminder of a couple of commonly used definitions used in our study and in purified water. So the first is indirect potable reuse, or IPR, and this is where groundwater basins can be supplemented with purified water using percolation or groundwater injection. So this is groundwater recharge, or GWR. Also, surface water reservoirs can be supplemented by purified water as well, and this is called surface water augmentation, or SWA. And for the purposes of this study, we looked into GWR using percolation. Next slide, please. And another definition here is direct potable reuse, or DPR. So here, raw water can be augmented with purified water before entering the water treatment plant. And this is called RWA, or raw water augmentation. Or the treated water could be augmented itself with the purified water being directly injected to the distribution system. And this is treated water augmentation, or TWA. And for the purposes of this study, we were looking at RWA, raw water augmentation. And next slide, please. So here's a figure that summarizes nicely the wide range of purified water options here. So it ranges from IPR all the way to DPR to that treated water augmentation option that we just mentioned as well. And next slide, please. So now jumping into our details about our draft results. So a couple of assumptions and decisions here is that our alternatives that were evaluated were looked at with and without USD's Enhanced Treatment and Site Upgrade, or ETSU program. And we also included a demineralization plant in this study. And this is specific to our study. And we'll go into more detail a little later, but the demin plant does help ACWD with their water quality objectives. And this does increase some of the cost estimates that we'll see here. but it is important for ACWD and our water quality. Next slide, please. And just some PFAS considerations to keep in mind as we go through the presentation. So PFAS is a new and evolving contaminant and has been through the period of this study. We did look into PFAS and we did see that PFOA and PFOS in the purified water would be reduced through the AWPF or the Advanced Water Purification Facility during the reverse osmosis process. And the Demon plant would remove additional groundwater PFAS, but it's not enough to meet our total district needs. And so, and we'll go into more detail about the Demon plant as well. But we just want to mention here that the current concept assumes that the Demon discharge would be going to the slough. However, with the new PFAS regs, that would prevent that. And so just noting here as well that additional cost for new brine discharge was not included in the study. Next slide, please.
Kelsey, do you mind if I make an observation?
Yes, please.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, but just to be 100% clear, what we're saying here is that the Demon that's in this has no connection with the ongoing discussions about PFAS treatment. This was tied to a previous study, served a different purpose. It's relevant to this study, but it's the two are not the same or interchangeable at all. So we just want to make sure there's no confusion there.
Thank you, Mr. Neiser. Great. Oh. And next slide. Great, thank you. So here's a summary of the alternatives and their draft cost estimates that we put together. So again, this is a high-level cost estimate range that was completed by the consultant. And these draft costs does assume the completion of USD's ETSU program. And so ETSU does provide the biological nutrient removal that is required for the purified water influent to the Advanced Water Purification Facility. And so it does reduce the capital and operating needs. And here you'll see there's one column with phase one, which is just for IPR, and the second column is the scenario with both phase 1 and 2, which is IPR and DPR. And so just wanted to note that for the second scenario of phase 1 and phase 2, that the phase 1 costing includes substantial capacity cost considerations to allow for the phase 2 expansion for DPR. And so
Can we ask a question?
Oh, yes, please.
There's a question on one of your chart on this chart. Would that be appropriate to wait till the end?
Maybe Kelsey, you want to finish what you were saying about this slide, maybe?
Yes,
And then-
yes.
I had a question I have on this.
Well,
It appears that there is no amortized cost per unit applied to the unit cost per acre foot. It is solely the total annual operations and maintenance cost that is shown in your bottom row.
Oh,
there is amortization of the capital. This is just reflecting the sort of current year. If we were to build it now, current cost, we'd be those unit costs in dollars per acre foot, or what the cost would be in current dollars.
As I look at the numbers and do the math, it appears that the unit cost reflected here is only the operations and maintenance cost and does not have an amortized cost for the capital necessary to produce this water.
It's capital and O&M.
You're taking
Thank
the
you.
amortized capital.
I encourage you to look at the, okay, so it's there, I see.
Yeah, the second line is
It there.
capital
All
plus
right,
O&M.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for the confusion. Kelsey?
I missed the second line.
Oh,
Thank
no problem. Thank you. Thank you for
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sorry,
What
yes.
is the amortization period that you're using?
Kelsey, you recall what period we used? It's probably somewhere on the order of 30 years.
probably, I would have to double check though. But yes, we can, I can double check that.
Thank you.
Great,
I
thank you.
think that the main thing to emphasize, if there's questions about this, is it's straight amortization of capital and O&M. There's no assumptions about bond funding or any creative funding, grants, any of that stuff. This is just what would it cost if you were going it alone? All right, Kelsey.
Great, thank you. Oh, I do see John's hand raised as well on my side.
Yeah, so typically when I coordinate with the water resources team about this type of amortization, it's based on a 30-year bond issuance at I believe a 4% interest rate is the latest that we've talked about. So that's Ms. Oshiro can confirm when she goes back to look at her notes after the meeting, but that's the likely amortization period and interest rate.
Great. Yes, thank you. Yes, I will double check that. Thank you.
And do we have an idea what the split is between those two? What percent is O&M and what percent is capital? Is it 50-50 approximately?
As in for the escalation of O&M costs?
Well, the split between, you have capital plus O&M. Is there what portion of that is capital and what portion?
Oh,
would
I
be
see.
O&M?
We have all that detail. We're trying to make the slides a little more simplified for this evening. We do have that information and we can definitely provide it.
Mhm.
Kelsey, or those online, the question was, what's the split of that annualized cost? That's a combination of capitalization and O&M. And I think you heard my response.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I noted it down. Thank you. Great. So great questions. Thank you. So yes, as mentioned, the unit cost per acre foot here is here in the last row, and it does we do include here in the summary the total capital cost range for both scenarios, as well as the total annual cost, which includes capital and O&M, and our average yields for both scenarios. And so for phase one only, for doing IPR, our average acre foot per year yield would be a little over 6,000 acre feet per year. And if we were to do the phase one and phase two combo, we would have an average yield of a little over 11,500 acre feet per year. And so this results in a unit cost range for phase one, just doing IPR, at about $4,700 to $6,100 per acre foot. And for the second scenario for phase one and phase two combo with IPR and DPR, that results in a unit cost range of a little over $3,800 to $4,700 per acre foot. And next slide, please. No other questions? Great. And so here's just a summary of our Bay desal cost comparison. The USBR Title 16 submission does require us looking at an identified alternative. And so what we've done currently is we've looked at our last alternative water supply study in 2014, and we estimated the cost for an 8,000 acre foot per year local Bay desalination project to be about $4,700 per acre foot. And so we did an escalation to $2022, and this cost would be a little over $5,900 per acre foot. And I just want to note here that the 2014 numbers are currently being updated, but will reflect any current land constraints, financing, and other engineering costs to be consistent with our current purified water study as well. And next slide, please. And here's a little bit more information for our draft summary results for our groundwater demon plant. So the cost estimate is included for a 6 MGD groundwater demon plant. And so the capital cost range is about 44 to 71 million. And here, demon was scoped to, again, treat only the additional groundwater supply made available to recharge with purified water, and did not address the evolving and current background PFAS concerns. And we also included demon on a consumption applying level to look at costing of replacement for SFPC supply use only. And so generally, can't have like a large scale RO reverse osmosis to handle the NOWSCO PFAS without looking into a new recharge source. And we also wanted to note that the construction of a large scale demon facility for purposes of PFAS removal from existing groundwater supplies would change the economic results of this study. And so there could be potential cost savings already being built into it. And
Okay, maybe I would suggest we pause here for 1
Oh.
second, Kelsey.
yes.
So this is, I think, if you don't mind, sorry, I want to just make sure we're all clear what this is saying. There may be discussions about building RO for the purposes of dealing with PFAS in the Niles Cone. Forget this study, right? Those discussions may come up. If we built PFAS at a large scale, all of these numbers would need to kind of go back and be revised because we have DMIN built into this for the purposes of treating groundwater to the San Francisco quality level. So it's a different objective than just the PFAS topic. Okay. Is that more or less clear? So we can't necessarily add these two things together. If we do a separate study on RO, we can't necessarily add it to this study and say that is the sum of the two. We'd have to revisit these numbers.
May I ask a question quickly?
Certainly.
In an earlier slide, you said that we're not factoring in the cost of discharging the brine.
Correct.
What would we do with the brine?
We would have to treat it. And that's sort of the point of what we're saying in here. At the time the study was done, PFAS was, I think, more of a topic of discussion in academia than being something we're dealing with. So the brine discharge from this small package DMIN plant that's considered in here has no PFAS consideration. There would be an extra cost. That one would add to these totals that are in this table that you just saw. So we got some pretty expensive water here. I think everybody's aware. There's still some additional cost for handling the PFAS and the concentrate.
How many more slides do you have? I have some comments.
Just about 2 more.
Okay, I'll withhold my comments.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Can we go back to Kelsey? Kelsey?
Yes. Great. Next slide, please. Oh, great. Okay. This study also looked at limnological study and some preliminary results. And so limnological is a lake science. And so we did a limnological study to help characterize our existing quarry lakes water quality and look at the effect of adding in purified water to quarry lakes. And so the preliminary limnological study results did show from their base model results that the water quality from the advanced water purification facility would actually improve the water quality in quarry lakes. And so based off of that, also the consultant put together some draft short and long-term water quality monitoring plans to help us continue to gather information and learn more about our water quality in quarry lakes in our local area. And these monitoring plans will also help us understand our blue-green algae issues as well. And a couple of next steps include completing a more detailed model that'll help us with our purified water study, but also in helping to understand further our water quality that already exists in quarry lakes and our local Alameda Creek system. And we are currently implementing the short-term water quality monitoring plan. And so we are going to continue to do that and gather more data and information. And we plan to implement the long-term water quality monitoring plan that was provided in this draft report. And next slide, please. So next steps for the purified water study, we are waiting for the last draft to be reviewed by us and our partner agencies, and we are looking to finalize this draft report. And once we have partner input, we hope to submit to USVR for their review for the Title 16 funding eligibility list in the first quarter of the next calendar year, in year 2023. And with that, we are
Can you come to my basketball game Sunday at 11:15 at was?
Yeah, we're taking care of it.
And with that, I'd like to thank you again for your time, and that's the end of my presentation.
Right. Thank you. The time is 4:47. We're returning from a break. Hopefully we will not be interrupted during the continuation of this meeting. Thank you. Thank you. General Manager.
Do we have a list of attendees here? Okay, there we go.
Yes,
Yep.
it's coming up.
Yeah, it looks like we have our attendees back, and thank you all for your patience and sorry about the disruption. So we just took a break as we were just completing up our discussion about next steps. And so it might be an opportunity now to see if there are any questions from members of the public or comments. And if there's any input from the board based upon what you've just seen, this would be a good time.
All right, fine. Let me first open to those who are attending, some representing other districts. Do we have any comment on the presentation that was made? I see no hands, so there appears to be none. Is there any comment from members in attendance? There currently is none. So return it to the questions from the board. Actually, do you have more in your presentation to make?
Not on the purified study. And I want to make sure, Kelsey, you're online. You can hear us?
Yes, I can hear and see. Thank you.
Okay, so I think and Kelsey, did you have anything else to say, or should we proceed to questions about the presentation?
No, that wrapped it up. We can proceed with questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have comments or questions from members of the board?
I have some, but we can start
Director Gunther,
at
do you
the other
have
end
any?
of the board.
Well, I'll keep them limited. It seems that there's a lot of unknowns here, particularly regarding the issues towards the PFAS and the groundwater. Certainly using that area for possibility, but it's still early in. And so we're getting some good data out of it anyway, and it's worthy a look. It's very pricey. But, you know, if it wasn't pricey, we'd probably already be doing it. So there aren't a whole lot of options out there at the moment. So thank you. Interesting study. You know, we've got other groups involved in this, not just us. It's USD and SFPUC. There are other agencies. We are not actually alone in this at the moment. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akbari.
Yeah, well, like it was mentioned, you know, this study's been in the works for quite some time, so I appreciate us getting to review some of the findings. I had just one question on the unit cost per acre foot from slide 20. It was noted that this source of supply would be particularly expensive, especially compared to our other sources of supply. I'm curious if you can kind of give us a sense of how much more expensive we're talking compared to our other sources, especially for members of the public who might be curious how this compares.
Sure. And Kelsey, do you mind if I take that one? I'll take that as a yes. So it gets a little complex, and here's where that breakout of the detail of capital versus O&M costs would come in handy. We have a unit cost for our weighted of all of our existing infrastructure, all of our existing facilities and supplies. It doesn't include capitalization since those costs are already sunk. But right now, our sort of weighted average cost of production is about $750 per acre foot. So that's where we need to break out those two components.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate it. Definitely a lot
Yeah.
more expensive or this is far more expensive than what we currently use. Appreciate that comparison. Thank you.
Mr. Sethy?
Yeah, I've always supported doing these studies, one, just so we are grounded in our own knowledge of what things are going to cost potentially, but also for the benefit of the public when people ask, why aren't you doing something? Well, you need something to back up your answer. And so I think it's very important to do these studies. I am truly alarmed at the cost. When you're talking about $500 million and down the road, at whatever point, it's 10 years from now, it's $1 billion, right? I think for a quarter of the cost, you could build a desal plant, brackish water desal plant, like our own, that's producing 10,000 acre feet a year. And we have jurisdiction on the west side of 880 that goes all the way up to the San Mateo Bridge. And there's a power plant up there by the bay. I think that would make a lot more sense if we did a full desal plant that would be accessible to San Francisco as well. And
A regional desal concept.
right. Much like what they're proceeding with up in the Sassoon Bay. And we know how much we spent on our desal plant. We can project out the costs on building a brand new one. But I don't think it would be more than half of what we're estimating here. I'm also concerned about going the extra mile to take care of the brine. It's like we're running through hoops, you know, that were not present some years back, where we could have discharged to a slough, much like we discharge from the desal plant. But feel like we're running through hoops here and extra exercises and engineering to try and resolve that one element of a potential water purification effort here. So if this came up for a vote today, I would absolutely vote no.
Okay, thank you. My comments. In the initial presentation listing the options that we're looking at, I never I failed to note that we had a discussion of using less than potable groundwater in a purple pipe scenario. And we understood that a number of years ago, we had a CIP project in the Pacific Commons area, which would have used a well and then supplied the purple pipe that was being laid as part of that project to be able to use for irrigation and fire flows. And I would encourage us to evaluate that as a cost alternative. I was concerned about the cost estimates that was shown as $6,000 an acre foot for desalination. Only 6 times what our own experience is with desal, we're using brackish groundwater. And to the extent that there's potential for additional brackish groundwater coming in at a cost of 1/6 of what has been identified in this report is something to give consideration to. And maybe it's 1/3, but it's certainly a fraction of what is being identified in this report as an alternative. Next, a drought, which is the basis of this, is a contingency. It's episodic. And if we look at alternate water supplies, when you look at recycled water, it's built into the base. It keeps coming. And now you're taking your most expensive water and putting it into your economic base. And then you build on top of that. I believe all desal can be structured where it is a peaking use and you're only bringing in the more expensive water to meet the needs of that contingency and not on an ongoing basis. I'm concerned about getting a better breakdown on the cost of capital versus O&M. And to get a bit of a handle, it appears that in each, and I expect it'll be about 50-50. But it's a critical element, interest rates and things can vary. But as pointed out earlier, these costs are several times higher than our current cost of water's projected currently and into the future, even using our most expensive water, which is San Francisco. But on average, once we average it all in, we're looking at 3 to 4 times the cost of what our water costs are for this proposal. It strikes me based on those numbers, this is not something we should prioritize in its future study and evaluation. Okay, thank you.
All very astute observations.
Please.
I wanted to share from everyone. I wanted to share just a couple things, a couple responses. Director Sethy in particular, the one thing that really shocked me with this study was we studied Bay desal and IPR in 2015. And Bay desal was this high and IPR was down here. It was about half the price. And now we've seen them come together in unit cost. That was really shocking to me on this study. I would not have expected these two to have equalized. We have to remind everybody that our existing groundwater desalination facility is not the same as desalinating the bay. Desalinating the bay would be much more expensive. And notably about this study too, is one of the major constraints is one of land. This area is substantially built out now and land is expensive, and any kind of a plant requires the acquisition of a fair amount of land. And that's a common denominator, both in the cost for this study, the desal concept, and if we were to do another sort of desal concept, is the availability and the cost of land on which to build that facility is a very significant component to this study. But the addition of the PFAS definitely does make your head spin a little bit.
I was not trying to express doing direct bay saltwater desal.
Yeah,
But
understood.
brackish water from the groundwater system. And you've got a power plant there. It's industrial properties. I'm sure a deal could be cut with somebody for, we don't have any more than 5 acres out in Newark. It's got to be 5 acres available someplace.
5 is about the size parcel needed for these concepts, yeah.
Right. And I think a regional effort on a brackish water desal plant in that vicinity would be not only valuable to San Francisco, but potentially Hayward as well, because they're all on San Francisco water paying the highest cost in the Bay Area.
Certainly.
So there are other potential communities that could benefit from it. Even East Bay Mud could have an intertie there as well.
Sure. No, it's a good point. The for not to belabor this point, but years ago, the regional desalination concept, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, which landed up in Mallard Slough area and Contra Costa Water District service area, did evaluate a number of locations, including right where you're talking about, Director Sethy, right in that sort of Dumbarton Bridge area. Benefits of access to the San Francisco Bay Division pipeline, Raker Act power from San Francisco, and the ability to sort of distribute it around. It was passed on for a number of reasons. I don't remember what they were. This was 20 years ago, but it was found less desirable than the preferred location of Mallard Slough. But I think there's going to be a lot more talk about regional desal with the pressures we're all experiencing on imported water supplies. And I think these topics will be resurfacing in the coming years.
Well, even the governor's kind of made it a mandate right now to look at all brackish water desal opportunities across the state, not only on the coastal areas, but inland as well.
There's several other factors when we look at our overall master plan in water. We're looking at contingency water supplies. We currently have 120,000 acre feet in groundwater banking in the San Joaquin Valley. Our need is 10,000 acre feet per year. That's a 12-year drought supply in reserve that we bought and paid for. So we'll see what happens with Sigma, but it's clearly we have some other alternatives, and there are other alternatives in the water market at a fraction of the cost of the $4,000 to $8,000 an acre foot we're looking at here. Next, we had a presentation on our climate change, which recommended that the moderate estimate for sea level rise was 84 inches by 2100, 7 feet. That's going to change land use dramatically in our area. Now, desal plant can be built on piers. It taps into the groundwater. So there may well be some dramatic changes, and those who have not taken recognition of dramatic changes in groundwater elevations are going to pay a dear price for it in the future.
We're gonna have to build a seawall barrier around USD.
And we're looking at approaching 20 feet elevation for sea level. And so those who are building it lower than that could have a real challenge.
Well, I appreciate the thinking about alternatives, right? Because that's really what part of what we're looking at with this water resources assessment, right, is alternatives. And, you know, I could see a recommendation coming out of this work to do things like keep an eye open for land that could be acquired in sort of strategic locations, program that into your capital program and so forth, so that, you know, even though we're not likely to be building foundations tomorrow, we may be looking sort of opportunistically for opportunities for land acquisition and other things, right? So that could be part of our strategy going forward.
I have an idea.
Oh, okay.
San Francisco owns our Deer Road property, right? That's about 5 acres.
They own the property next
Or
to
10
us.
10 acres.
Correct.
So we could do a land exchange with them.
Okay, got it. I'll write it down on my list of ideas.
Yeah, a 1031 tax exchange.
The other part is East Bay Regional Park District, which has significant holdings in prime areas along the groundwater basin.
Right. Well, it's been a great discussion so far. I think we're veering well off the path of the purified water concept and getting into water resources planning. And I'd suggest we continue on with the thrust of the evening's conversation. If that's all right. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Kelsey. I hope you're going to stick around.
Yes, thank you so much.
Right. And again, we thank our guests from Union Sand joining us. Feel free to stick around. Any last comments or questions on the topic of the joint study? Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So coming back to our IRP update, our water supply master plan, you see, I'm conflicted with the terms. We really want to talk about where we want to go with this study. Depending on how we want to scope it, it could be precision, refined, dialed in. It could be vast and all inclusive. There's a lot to be discussed, and we're hoping to scope that with the board as I'll present here. But in order to understand a little bit more about what this all takes, we wanted to just step back a little bit, provide a little bit of background information on water supply planning in general. Much of this information is just summarized from the AWWA Research Foundation Manual on water supply planning. I'm presenting it here largely so this packet can be a useful resource for the board members, and we'll go fairly quickly through this. In the spectrum of planning, we have the traditional, what we call supply side planning. I will go ahead and characterize this as maybe being sort of your hetchy style system. This is characterized by an ample source of supply that has a lot of unilateral ownership. San Francisco owns the watersheds, their facilities, their pipelines, alignments. They control the water, the power, and really their decision-making in water supply planning historically has been mostly what does it cost to provide service. With time, we've seen this move as those exclusive water systems disappear. You've got the Catskills in New York, and you've got Hetch Hetchy, and to some degree McCallamy Reservoir for East Bay mud. But with time, those special systems that have the exclusive domain of one or two owners have disappeared, and we've had to move more towards diversification of water supplies, so supplementing multi-supplies. And what happens with that is the expansion of partners and other entities of interest that have other thoughts about how to manage those supplies. And then we get into least cost planning, you're starting to look more at different supplies and still being cost focused, but expanding the purview and starting to bring stakeholders in at a new level. I don't want to say that a San Francisco style system doesn't have stakeholders involved, but if you look at how it works, they're sort of on the outside knocking on the door to come in and comment versus in a case like ACWD, where we have an integrated approach, we have very unconventional supplies. We have desalination and groundwater banking. These are things that were very avant-garde 20, 30 years ago. We have a lot of partnerships and co-operations with stakeholders on all of our systems. Apart from just other members of the State Water Project and Hetch Hetchy system, we share the South Bay Aqueduct with Zone 7 in Santa Clara. We work with East Bay Parks at Quarry Lakes and in Lake Del Val. Our groundwater basin is increasingly having interest from neighboring entities that want to develop groundwater. So we are immersed in all of our supplies in coordinated operations. And so integrated resources planning really brings stakeholders who have additional interests into the process at the beginning. And the idea is that by building stakeholder support along the way, we have approval for our plan, at least tacit approval. And as we go to implementation, things like CEQA and establishing rates to fund these things will have already been sort of pre-blessed with the input from the interested parties. There's a huge paragraph to define IRP, and I just pulled out some summarized bulleted statements, and I underlined some key words here, but things that go into integrated planning, comprehensive, includes demand management. So conservation is embraced similar to how you would embrace a new supply. It's not just lip service. We want to invest in conservation as an alternative to developing new supply. It is what we nowadays call triple bottom line. It considers costs and impacts from engineering as well as economic, societal, and environmental. It balances the competing needs of multiple objectives of resource use. So in this case, we're talking the multiple functional areas of water. We work with stormwater with the county. We use that stormwater to recharge our groundwater basin. These are different elements of the water cycle that have management priorities that don't necessarily align at all times. It's an open and participatory process. It strives for consensus while encompassing least cost analyses, both long and short-term planning options. It has regulatory compliance built into the works rather than going out with an idea and then figuring out how to get your permits. You're working with the regulatory entities along the way. It explicitly seeks to identify and manage risk and uncertainty, dealing with stakeholders and regulators. That's how that comes in. Includes regional collaboration, and is a continuous process. As we've been stressing, it's adaptive. You don't just set a course, go to sleep and hope to wake up in Hawaii. You got to stay on the navigation because the sea is changing. This is also kind of interesting. The history of the IRP comes from the power industry. And one of the banes of my existence here at ACWD is when people call up and say, where's your water supply master plan? And I say, oh, it's right here. It's the IRP. And I send them the link and they're like, oh, I don't care about your power plan. I want to know about water. This is because the basis that came from integrated planning came from the power industry. It moved into the water industry in the 90s when our agency adopted it. And this I found interesting and I wanted to include because history, as we know, can repeat itself. The real pressures, according to AWWA, which drove IRP planning in the 90s were the development of Safe Drinking Water Act. So new water quality and regulatory standards driving additional treatment requirements and concerns about emerging contaminants of concern. Sounds familiar. Environmental issues. 90s, we had seen the environmental movement, a couple decades old now. Not only did you have public interest, but you now saw environmentalism start to emerge in a regulatory environment. Licensing processes were requiring consideration for new environmental issues that had been part of water planning previously. Conservation and efficiency, again, environmentalism, but also the discovery that you know, it might be cheaper to use less water than to develop some expensive new supplies to meet our peaking demands. And then also aging infrastructure was cited as a pressure when dealing with all of these other challenges. You're already looking at costly aging infrastructure and wanting to make smarter decisions. So I looked at this list and I thought, well, geez, that's us today, isn't it? Right there. Nothing seems any different in today's environment. And so that's why I wanted to include that here for the board. ACWD's 1995 IRP and implementation is all but complete. We embrace demand management, desalination, offsite groundwater banking, conjunctive use groundwater management, the combined use of surface and groundwater. We did have to identify treatment upgrades so that we could take advantage of those supplies that we had available as imports. And on the bottom of this list, you'll see highlighted as recycled water. This is the one element that was recommended, and we've passed the point of implementation. So we acknowledge that we haven't implemented recycled water as was envisioned, but again, that was through adaptation to the changing environment. As was noted very astutely by Director Gunther, if it made sense and it wasn't so pricey, we would have done it already. It's just the time has not come, and we're not alone. It's a very common story in the water industry. And Marion, if you move the bar over, you'll note this is an excerpt from the 2014 Reliability by Design report. We put a check on this because at the time we felt our steady implementation by construction of almost 2 miles of purple pipe was showing progress towards implementation. But I say today that this is no longer something that's worthy of a check. Thank you. So questions, what do we want to achieve with the new water resources master plan? We checked everything off. Are we in good shape? Do we need to do a big update? I don't know. As with any sort of planning, you can always start with a needs assessment. We've done a little preliminary gap assessment. We know our system pretty well. ACWD has a very robust portfolio. I've put this together for the board. This is a qualitative assessment by staff collectively has weighed in on this, where we've done a ranking of 1, 2, and 3, 1 being low, 3 being high, on our, let me go here, our major supply sources versus the planning criteria that the board used in 1995 to see how are we doing? How do we stack up compared to what we said we're looking for, we as an entity, what we are looking for in a portfolio. And not much to hang out on here. I point out a few things. As we mentioned last month, our drought experience and our knowledge of semi-tropic has vastly changed our understanding of groundwater banking in California, as well as its importance in the future. So a couple of things I'd like to note. We've combined State Water Project and semi-tropic because at this point, they're not really separate. In a year like this, they really work together between DWR, semi-tropic themselves, and us, as well as the banking partners. That reliability is really reflective of how that is working as a system versus 2 separate entities. So whereas we might have given this a 1 in the past, it's a solid 2 now. We are getting everything we need in a drought with the use of semi-tropic and the way we've our conjunctive use management of that program. But in general, you'll notice the State Water Project is, stacks pretty poorly. So we have some vulnerabilities in terms of water quality, environmental impacts, local control, risk. These all rank pretty poorly. Moving across, just a few other notes. Niles Cone, water quality. We put a qualifier on there. We've got emerging contaminants of concern. The water quality concern of Niles Cone used to be purely aesthetic. It's evolving, as this board knows well. But as far as environmental impact, at this point, Niles Cone, we've negotiated a biological opinion. We feel really good about the terms that we have and continued access to our local water supply. So we consider the environmental risk factors for the Niles Cone to be favorable. In fact, I don't even know why we have deficiency so low on risk. Oh, I think we're thinking sea level rise, climate change for the Niles Cone. And one other thing to note, if you notice Lake Del Valle looks really solid, but there's only about 5, 6, maybe 7,000 acre feet on average from there. So looks good. There's just not a lot of it. So we need to weight these things to put them into a broader perspective.
If I can just ask a quick question, I noticed that Niles Cone's local control score is only moderate plus, and I'm just curious, why not the 3
Why not
stars, the way-
3?
Yeah,
So we would have called it 3 in the past, but under Sigma, not so much Sigma. I think Sigma is very protective of our operations. Sigma, you could say Sigma was built off of agencies like ours and our history. The concern there is that with the pressures on imported supplies, we're seeing all of our neighboring agencies interested in developing groundwater. And there's a lot of interconnectedness, and I won't speak to it because I'm sure I'll get something wrong, and I'd hate to do that. But it's, whereas it used to really feel like it was ours and ours exclusively, there's more interest in people tapping into the periphery that may impact us, and we have to figure that out.
thank you.
I would
Sure.
comment on Del Val.
Mhm.
The restriction on Del Val appears to be an administrative one, not a hydrogeological one, because we parked a visitor center from a park district at the bottom of the reservoir. And that lease expires in 2024. I would encourage us to pursue discussions on Lake Del Val for the 50,000 acre feet that's built, plumbed and paid for, which is not being used.
Sure, it's a good distinction as noted. Thank you, Director Weed, and we are on it. When we talk about water supply from Lake Del Val, we're not talking about, maybe we had 100,000 acre foot reservoir, that'd be great. But the watershed itself will only produce on average about 5,000-6,000 acre feet a year. So being able to store more water in that reservoir is nice, but we need the actual water supply. And so we're talking about, and it's not a subjective thing, it has nothing to do with parks. It has to do with the USGS gauge. You can see the runoff on that watershed. It only produces around 5,000-6,000 for ACWD's benefit on average.
So the ability to park the water there is really the advantage, that we can use it for transfer water and.
It's
quickly enhance.
operational emergency supply, that sort of thing. But as far as wet water, a quantity of water, the watershed is what produces it, not the reservoir. So we need to keep those things separate in our minds.
But it is
It's not
plumbed
to
the
take
delta.
away from the value of having more storage there.
Why do you score Lake Del Val so low on environmental?
Very good question. Okay, so Lake Del Val currently has really no environmental requirements. The live stream requirement downstream of that reservoir is sort of a wetted channel. And if we don't have water in that reservoir, we have no requirements. As we've noted, if there was to be a substantial change such as a dam raise, that would trigger consultation, and there would be substantial new environmental requirements for operation of that reservoir, and that water supply would, there's no reason to assume it wouldn't be substantially diminished to provide more live stream downstream requirements. So
But environmental impacts.
to do more work on it, to develop it more as a water supply. So it's not to say that it has, well, depends how you look at it. An environmentalist would look at that reservoir and say, there's no downstream flow requirements. The downstream situation is poorly manipulated by the dam, has been severely impacted, and has an impact to the channel below that dam. That's a very solid
Well-
position. This is really more about the potential to develop it more.
Reoperation of Del Val is much more important than raising the dam.
Correct. So if reoperation can be done without triggering any sort of Section 7 consultation, we can talk about maybe getting a little bit more yield out of it. And it's like our FURA study looked at, it's on the order of hundreds of acre feet, not thousands. You're not getting an extra yield. The watershed is the limitation there. The watershed doesn't have a lot more to produce. So we're nearly maxed out on that watershed as it is, as the FURA study itself found. So reoperation, it can get us a little bit more yield. It's more about optimizing and reducing risk and some of the other sort of tangential benefits to have a more robust water supply system. But our yield isn't really going to get substantially better there.
May I suggest?
I beg to differ, but
We can look at the statistics. It's right there on the USGS gauge. There's a fixed volume of water that's run in every year over decades, and that's really what defines the yield off that watershed. 50% of it's ours, which is a great deal. But if anything is done substantially as an engineering project there, if Section 7 consultation with the Army, anytime we work in an Army Corps control system, which is what that is, flood control, it will trigger a Section 7 consultation with the other federal entities, and that will include National Marine Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And that will introduce a whole host of environmental management controls that we don't currently have.
The Corps has been involved in other reservoir reoperations, like up in Mendocino, where they're operating at a higher average level throughout the year.
Yeah.
And that's for flood control as well.
As long as it states, you got a high band and a low band in flood management. This is a high surface water, here's a low surface water. As long as you stay in those bands, you're not changing the flood control manual. FERO just looks to optimize where you are at a time of the year in that band to make sure if there's no rain coming, you keep it up high. You don't drain it out artificially. You keep that water up high so you can benefit from it. And if there is rain coming, maybe you take it down low. But really in FERO, you're really sticking within those bands. And that's what the sort of work that they're doing, really sticking inside those bands. So that shouldn't trigger anything as long as you're inside those bands.
On Del Valle, we're currently limited to about 42,000 acre feet because of the location of a visitor center. The glory hole is at 77,000 acre feet. We don't have to touch the dam, but we could raise the glory hole to the 90,000 acre foot level, which is a relatively modest construction modification. And the reason it says 77,000 is because of a location of a bridge toward the near the inflow of the system. So a mere modification of the glory hole. We're taking advantage of eliminating the restrictions we have for the intake to a less than 1 MGD water treatment facility to take care of park districts, again, facilities that are local. Put at the bottom of the reservoir under the argument that it's easier to build parking lots at the bottom of the reservoir than having to terrace them into the shed. So at a nominal cost in comparison to these other projects, we're looking at a multitude of the water requirements to meet our long-term requirements, long-term needs. Yeah. So I encourage us to continue to pursue the Del Valle options and would suggest that this last Christmas, we showed we could operate at 43,000 acre feet in a very heavy downpour. When the flood control curves called us to drop it to 25,000, that's an 18,000 acre feet that we just proved that we could utilize and hopefully get credit for. The water calculus being as odd as it is, but in truth, we had an extra 18,000 acre feet over the Christmas season. This past Christmas. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So this is referential. These are not hard facts. These are qualitative from staff, but hopefully useful for understanding where maybe we have some deficiencies or things that can be strengthened. I will point out that the board did add a few of those items I mentioned last year, and we've added some of the components of climate readiness or climate vulnerability, as well as resiliency under these categories. Again, these are not official board objectives, but things we've added. Frankly, I think they, as I mentioned last time we met, I think they really just come down as additional criteria and detail under the risk category. But there's some additional thoughts on those items for you. And there you have the climate readiness. We are reflecting the benefit of FERO potential at Lake Del Valle. So that might speak to some of the comments just received. So on the November 10th board meeting, we did a little workshop exercise, pre-workshop exercise, excuse me, to kind of get a sense of where the board was on these objectives and what the board was feeling were higher priorities. And we just wanted to share those results. For people who were on the phone or weren't here last time, we asked the board, this says all attendees, we actually limited it just to board members, to assign a score to our existing priority policy objectives, scores out of 100 and adding up to 100. And that way we could get a balanced weight for the board and see where people were feeling were the areas for greatest concern, I think, moving forward. Again, not reflecting any sort of weaknesses, but just the gut feelings more than anything. So this was an exercise to capture personal valuations of these objectives in relation to other objectives, and is not used at all for any sort of board policy or decision making. The board will be reevaluating these concepts with input from the community, as well as potentially new objectives in the coming year. But we wanted to provide the results for everybody. Here's captured everybody's scores. Thank you. Everybody's scores added up to 100. We didn't have to do any math on the back end. Appreciate that. Everybody gets an A. When I put the data together, I captured everyone's highest individual score with the green, as well as your lowest scores in red. And that's largely for us to just kind of see how everybody fits together. So just using one example, I used Director Akbari, alphabetic first. Director Akbari rated risk as the highest weight at 30% and had tied weights for local control and water quality down at 15%. And so you can see the results as we run across. I put these together just in a few sort of stats formats. Here's just the raw data as a bar chart. Sometimes visually it helps. We only had one outlier. Director Gunther, actually a little bit more aligned with me, I think, gave some outsized weighting to reliability. It's typically where I go. But in general, a lot of tight grouping and a lot of consistency. I was really pleasantly surprised to see how much agreement there was amongst the board, and really noting that risk and reliability. Clearly, this board puts risk and reliability as sort of the highest weight priority collectively, and there's a lot of interface between those two things. And one thing I really noted was the local control was the most tightly agreed upon and sort of lowest ranked amongst the board in uniformity. This chart with these whiskers, box and whisker, they call it, that shows the range of response. And then the box itself kind of tries to group it in and say, here's more what you would call your bell curve. It's kind of silly with only 5 votes on these, but it still captures. And when it's really tight, that means you guys are all really in close alignment. So some things to take away when these boxes overlap. It means they've got some competing priority, even if one's higher than the other. But my takeaways, risk and reliability were clearly highest. And then these outside cost and water quality, very comparable. And it says to me that those two will probably have a lot of conflict when we're looking at scenarios. When you're looking at two things of more equal weight, it's going to automatically put those two in a little bit into competition. And this is a chart, you'll be seeing this a lot. I like to use these a lot for sort of weighted priorities. It's called a radar chart. I just plotted this up so you can see what a completely balanced weighting would be. If we just said, hey, all 5 of these things are of equal value, that's what that blue dashed line would look like. And this gives you a sense of maybe imbalance or well, that's usually what the term would be if there's an imbalance. This shows a lot of balance to me. I see, everything kind of lined up near equal priority with that clear weighting towards reliability. And then that dropping off of local control, saying, that one's probably not quite as important, which I really enjoyed these results. Frankly, when I put these together, I was surprised at how quickly they came out during the evening. And when they put them together and saw that uniformity, I really appreciated it.
What do you call that diagram?
That's called a radar chart. Yeah. And if we add new criteria, that polygon, pentagon will turn into a hexagon or a septagon or heptagon, septagon, octagon, megagon, depending on how many things we put in there. So here's basically, I just said all these things. We saw a lot of general agreement and overall balanced ranking amongst the board members. That risk and reliability rank consistently high. Makes a lot of sense. Local control being a little diminished. So I just wanted to, I know the board's had this data early, wanted just to kind of ask if there's any questions about it. In particular, does seeing the results as they're laid out, does it kind of feel right to the board? Does this feel, having gone through the rest of that workshop, does that, does it make sense? Did anything stand out to you or seem surprising?
I could repeat a comment I made at the last meeting that I felt risk was a subset of reliability, and they should be read combined as a single score.
Yeah, and noted, yeah, we discussed how it was defined previously, and we may define it as just one category moving forward. You know, another approach is just to say we have a reliability threshold and we're going to meet it, like we did with the environmental, not to give it a weighting, but just to say this is the criteria we will establish and we will meet it. If it doesn't meet this, the portfolio fails. You can take the reliability metric completely out. So we'll have a lot of opportunity to do different things as we put together this criteria. Let me ask about the local control. So this was a high priority in the 1990s, and I have some thoughts about maybe why it ranked so low by this board compared to the seated board at that time. Are there any thoughts about why folks maybe voted that lower?
I can go ahead with that one. We've been involved now for so many years in so many different type of operations. It's not a mystery anymore. You know, groundwater banking, okay. State water project. Well, that was the first one, state water project, okay. Groundwater banking, quarry lakes. We're so involved in so many different ways that it's not a mystery. And I think that's the big concern about local control. It becomes this, oh, you got to control it. You got to hold all your cards. And we're willing to not necessarily hold all our cards. I want to use that term, but we're willing to go out there and look and say, look, we'll cooperate with you. We kind of expect cooperation back, but we're more willing to take that risk than somebody who's never been involved in it. And perhaps 30 years ago, we weren't there.
We also have San Francisco and Lake Del Val. We're participating in Los Vaqueros Reservoir and that project. To do a regional desal plant like I was talking about, brackish water desal. We have so many relationships, you know, out there.
Yeah. So to summarize, sounds consistent with Director Gunther. You're saying we're comfortable in that environment versus we've built our local control and we have enough of it.
I think local control, as I understand it from listening into other agencies, is more about ego than being practical.
As also,
We have the ability to set our rates, which is where I think we have the control. But we are 1%, a little over 1% of the state water project, 4% of the San Francisco Hetch Hetchy system. So we are bit players in the major cost factors facing the district.
and I was looking at some of the topics that we've discussed, especially in special board meetings in the last couple of years. And I feel like of these 5 topics, the other 4 have come up pretty frequently: risk, reliability, water control, water quality and cost. Local control, at least since I joined the board, hasn't been a significant issue apart from some of the challenges that we face with the Niles Cone Basin. But considering that we got past that and now some of the projects that we're working on are more regionally focused and more collaborative, I think local control is just not, at least in my mind, as significant of a concern as it may have been previously, especially when you weight it against the other concerns that we have, where we are seeing more significant challenges and have seen that in the last few years.
Okay, so you're falling more into the category of the gap assessment. You don't see it as a weakness that has come up that needs to be identified.
Not as much when you compare it to the other.
Okay, that's what I was expecting to hear a little bit more of, is that we went big on local control in the past and maybe we've shored it up.
Well,
That's great diversity response, right?
I gave a little bit higher score to local control because of our reliance on Alameda Creek. And we've had to really work hard to maintain that local supply of water. With all the investment we made in fish ladders and screens and everything else, we did it with the purpose of protecting that water system.
Yeah.
You know, for our own recharge purposes and everything else. So to me, that is an aspect of local control that
Absolutely.
we have to do a good job on in the future. And Alameda Creek is 40% of our water in a typical year. So, like you mentioned earlier on the biological opinion that we have decades of work in the future for this district, you know.
My caveats on this are, as a district, we should seek to acquire with Alameda Creek ownership of the watershed, the reservoir, and the pipeline. There's been discussions in the past by the South Bay Aqueduct contractors to acquire ownership of the South Bay Aqueduct because we've paid for it. So it's not a major, it's a huge maintenance cost to maintain it, but you control it. And if you look at San Francisco and other regional water systems that own and manage their water supply system, and that is within our reach. It was a tragic decision on the part of the board a few years ago not to acquire the N3 Ranch, which was 50,000 plus acres of, almost 50,000 acres of watershed. Del Valle Reservoir, we have missed the boat time and time again. I call it a scandal. But again, getting control and ideally ownership of Del Valle Reservoir should be a long-term objective of this board. On the environmental risk side, get the hell out of any open channel and put the water in a pipeline, which means the development of the Niles Canyon Aqueduct as a water supply directly to from the South Bay Aqueduct to our quarry pits. So those are areas in our water resource planning and IRP that are conspicuous by their absence. And hopefully we can someday get to the mindset that we're able to address those issues.
I think we should just buy the whole Hetchy system. That would be rock solid. Noted. So Director Weed, in comment, so where that would fit into our existing criteria, buying the watershed, buying the SBA, that would say you would weight local control to be quite high. You want to have ownership and you want to have control of that system.
And we have the funding to do it.
Okay. Okay. Regarding getting out of channels, just to put things in context, I think the classic way to look at getting out of surface water conveyance for imported interbasin transfers, it is a risky area. That's a risk category. The environmental regulatory community might stop that in the future.
I'd say
Right now
our
it
current
works.
practice is a high risk because we've just seen with the somewhat bizarre environmental projects we've gotten involved with in recent years, which we've done in lieu of maintaining and upgrading our own existing water distribution system.
Noted. So my point is that would fall under a risk category. You see a risk to the ability to continue to operate that way. Great. Well, one last question here. Are there any feelings right now about other objectives? We're going to talk about this in a couple of slides still, but other objectives are things that, you know, you would have liked to have said, here's what my priority is. We do have a slide to talk about this, but is there anything that really stood out that's not on this that you want to share at this time?
I think one of the things that stands out to me, I'm the outlier on 50%, but if one adds risk and reliability together, we're all pretty darn close. And reliability is definitely risk. I include that. I just want to say, I've said it in the past, I've lived without water. Coast Guard never had enough on their ships. It was a very unpleasant experience. And it doesn't matter how much it costs. It doesn't matter how great it is. It's absolutely worthless if it doesn't come out of the tap. We can never forget that. And, you know, whether that means chasing some environmental thing down the creek or, you know, we don't control the federal government. We don't control the state government. We could try to impact that. And I think we've been very successful in pursuing lobbying, et cetera, to try to get our message out there. But we're just one message among a whole lot of others. And for the past few years, I mean, sometimes our message doesn't come out on top. We have to adjust. So that's where I'm coming from. And probably going to keep going because I just don't see a difference. I mean, Lake Delval, I agree. It's a great source. But the park district politically controls a lot of power. And we could want something and it makes all the sense in the world to us as an engineer. Yes. But if you can't get that past the government stage, this board has always been great. We've maintained a very good focus on water and keeping it there, not going out there. But the rest of the state is out there. And we have to live in that environment.
And we've
Comments?
developed that comfort, as you mentioned earlier.
My response to that, if I might, is the district is in a strong financial position. Even, we just had a financial committee meeting earlier this week, yesterday. Even in a drought, when our revenues have been challenged, we had a net increase in our position of disposable income of about $2.5 million a month, or $30 million a year. For several years running, and that net position has increased by over $50 million a year. We are strong, and one thing that can counter any political hubris on the part of a park district is a strong financial position of the board. We have a 9-to-1 funded ratio. We have therefore limited debt, 9 times the income necessary to cover our debt expenses. That is an extraordinarily strong position for the water industry or any utility. And not to recognize that, and windows change, conditions change over time, but we have the financial wherewithal to secure our water supply sources, including watershed, water aqueducts, which we could add on to the Niles Canyon, and the reservoirs.
So coming back to the question, is it fair to say that maintaining fiscal solvency is a priority objective? Cash is king, having fiscal solvency as an objective.
We have the
It's the
opportunity.
counter to cost, really.
We have the opportunity financially
You're
to
just
meet
talking about
our
the
optimum
opportunity.
desires and
Okay.
goals. And that's why
Noted. Okay. Well, thank you. Good. Well, what?
I have a different way of putting that. We have the opportunity of leveraging our financial position without putting the district at risk.
Yeah, what I was trying to ask is there a way to make that into a policy objective within planning is kind of what we're focusing on. I definitely hear the point and I see the merit. I'm asking, is that like something we'd like to develop in our planning policy?
as shown on your chart, we're not restricted by financial considerations.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks. Should we move on?
I think there might have been a request for a break.
Yes, so
Okay.
do we,
How much further do you have to go?
There's about 6 slides and we want to have some meaningful conversation. So
let us take a short break now. We might,
I think that'd be a good idea.
be back in within 10 minutes. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So go ahead.
Welcome back to the special board meeting of the AlamedaCountyWater District. It is currently 3 minutes to 6 o'clock on the official clock on the wall. Thank you.
All right, shall we
Please.
resume? All right. Great, well, and I really want to thank the board for entertaining us with that exercise. We'll be kind of touching back on that over the coming years, just sort of a reference. I think it'll help us understand the material as we go through it. So moving on, like I said, we wanted to start with a bit of a gap assessment. Now, this is really staff gap assessment of strengths and weaknesses of our current portfolio. And as this board this may take a little while to recap, but as was presented in, I believe it was November of last year, this board saw a presentation that I gave with support from some very good modeling work by Devin Becker. And we said, what's the best we could do with our portfolio with our build out demand? We looked at the ABAG build out, which is, they call it 2050. It's probably beyond 2050, frankly, at growth rates, but that's including that's tens of thousands more housing units. And we looked at our existing contracts and supplies and our future projected reliability and put it together. And we found that, if we can meet the projected demand and be within our level of service goals that we have today with our existing portfolio, provided we do a few things. One, we got to stick to that water use efficiency plan, which I don't expect us to back away from. The WEMP, if we follow that, that's going to, right now it's showing that we won't be in compliance by 2030 with the state legislative standards. However, the bump we're getting in demand reduction from the drought, and we're going to see some permanent demand reduction. I feel very confident it's going to be the final little push we need to make sure we hit the efficiency standards of 2030. But as long as we stick with it through 2030 and beyond, we can hit the future demands, provide for future demands. It also means, though, that pretty soon we're going to need to start purchasing our full San Francisco contract. So I presented this to the board, and I just want to refresh everybody with what this means. Our state water project supply, with the benefit of access to San Luis Reservoir and semi-tropic, is a supply that if we have surplus of, we can bank for future years. Our San Francisco supply is what's called a use it or lose it contract. Every year we get offered an amount of water. We can use up to that amount. And if we don't use it, we don't get to carry it over. It goes back into the pool and it builds the base for next year's contract. As we see declines in the state water project that are anticipated, that are in the published reliability data from the state, we are going to need to do a better job of using that San Francisco supply, which cannot be carried over, and instead bank surplus table A state water supplies, so that when we get into droughts, we have that water available in semi-tropic to bring back and keep us whole as we get through a drought. So that was the analysis that we've presented to the board. And the tie-in there, we did this as part of the Los Vaqueros analysis, because what Los Vaqueros does is it brings in more delta-based supply and would allow us to not purchase all of that San Francisco in all years. Point is, the contracts we have can meet the demands that we're anticipating right now. Now, if we're purchasing that full San Francisco in every year, it does mean with our infrastructure right now, well, first of all, it's going to be expensive. But second, we can only take so much to our blending facility. The rest has to be taken through our direct takeoffs. And what that gives us is pockets of different water quality throughout our distribution system, which, mind you, was the exact condition that existed in the 1980s and 90s that the board wanted to get away from, where you have one part of our system having pure San Francisco Hetch Hetchy water, and then another part having blended groundwater, and another part having TP2 water, and all of them seeing notably different water quality. If we're willing to live with that condition and the costs, our existing portfolio should be able to take us to that future build out level with the existing assumptions of today. And we should be able to hit that 90% level of service goal, which is going to be important, because as we get out to this level, we're going to see really hardened demands. And Director Weed, I know this is a sensitive subject for you. This is really, once we get out there and we see that indoor demand really getting hardened and down there, and we have less and less outdoor demand, when we get into a drought, we are not going to be able to go to people and say, hey, cut back 20% without them being more impacted at a sort of potential public health and safety level. So our future level of service goal, we're going to have to be critical of what does that really mean with the future efficiency standards. So this is a good story. I'm trying to give you the caveats, the warts and all here, but this is a good story. Our portfolio has got legs to carry us the distance. Now, counter that, the weaknesses that, this is staff assessment, but the weaknesses that we're observing with the long range planning, The number one thing that I see is risk and uncertainty. So we have that imported supply challenges with both Hetch Hetchy and San Francisco, Hetch Hetchy and state. And collectively, we're talking 60% of our supply. We don't know how far the regulatory action will go. We have a sense of what the Bay Delta plan is going to look like, but the uncertainty of what comes after that still remains. And really more, we saw that climate adaptation study last month. All of our supplies are facing climate change uncertainty. We don't know how significant the impacts are going to be to the supplies. We do know certain things like the Delta in particular is highly vulnerable just from the sea level rise concern. The viability of the Delta to continue to deliver water is questionable. And frankly, and the general manager and I have been discussing this last week. The folks who are in the position to tell us when that's going to be, don't know the answer yet. It's a very complex analysis, and we don't know how much longer the Delta in its current state is going to continue to be a viable mechanism for delivering state water. But from the assessment from our friends at Brown and Caldwell, I think the next 30 years, we're going to be in good shape. Once we get past 2050 and we see more sea level rise and where the uncertainty gets larger, who knows? So we're going to have to be discussing, do we want to be planning for the near term and keeping an eye on the long term, or do we want to be thinking past 2050? But these are the biggest areas of risk that I see as a planner here of 20 years at the Water District. These are the things that make me most concerned of where we should be focused, personal opinion. We're seeing expanding water quality expectations, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but think PFAS. Another area of weakness is the public input. This board may be evaluating some very significant decisions, some potentially sensitive decisions on what to do in the Delta. Do we support the Delta or not? In the past we have, but we've had discussions in this board where members of this board have had concerns about whether or not we want to be behind a Delta conveyance project. There may be opinions in the public that we should understand as this board is representing this community. This community has changed quite substantially since the 1990s. Socioeconomic changes, cultural changes, the community, the business community has changed. It is a completely transformed community since the 1990s. And we want to make sure that we get that input looking forward for the next 30 years from the folks who are here now and raising the next generation now. So that's something we've done some surveys like, how do you feel about this or that? And some of the sort of service oriented surveys, but we haven't gotten meaningful inputs on how people feel about potable reuse of water.
Well, one of those changes that's occurred over the years I've witnessed since childhood is that the water board meetings used to be very well attended. And sometimes they had to be moved to Washington High School because there were so many people, the auditorium over there. And over the years, we've had dwindling attendance decade by decade.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know why that is. Do we not use
Maybe because we're delivering such a good product.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, but I'm also scared to assume that.
Well, a lot of it was tied to development.
Yeah.
People wanted to be first in line to get water and sewer and other utilities to their property. So there were major fights, to get in line.
Land interest.
Well,
Okay. Thanks. But we have development. We've got substantial densification continuing to go on. We're not a land use agency, as the board knows, but we are supportive of the cities. And we have a role to play in making that happen. So we've got alternatives out there that could be a lightning rod that are going to certainly be challenging discussions for this board. I've just threw a couple up there. It'd be great to know where the community feels about these certain topics. How do they feel about investing in conservation versus spending a lot of money on big reliability improvements? If we did the trade-offs of cost of service and a little bit more conservation versus cost of service with less conservation and expensive new reliability projects, we may get meaningful input from the community on where their priorities lie. That goes right along with willingness to pay alternative rate structures. And then climate change. How critical is mitigating risk and climate change uncertainty to the community? The younger generation is definitely one of the first questions that comes up when we speak with the younger generation. And there's a whole host of others. I don't claim to know, this is not my area. I don't claim to know what the public input would need, but these are the ones that just come to mind based on the topics that we hear out in the public that people ask us about. But I want to step back to this water quality topic, and largely because I'm very happy with how this graphic came out. In 1995, we had a very clear two types of water quality. There was required, and then there was this aesthetic, which is primary and secondary, I think, in the federal standards is the terminology. We were called them required and aesthetic. And we had an objective to improve aesthetic water quality. And as we've discussed here, here's the animation. As we've discussed, as of late with improved technology and monitoring, we're seeing this new class of water quality concerns come up. There's sort of reporting levels and notification levels. There's sort of emerging contaminants, things that we can measure now that we never knew were there. And how do we want to deal with them? And it's definitely strained our ability to sort of objectively put water quality into two buckets. And the board's making some tough decisions right now on this topic. And so it's definitely an expansion to the topic of water quality in our planning. And one other thing about our current position, one thing that would be key to a textbook IRP integrated approach is really a lot of emphasis on going the next step and aligning policies with your stakeholder groups, particularly other entities. We don't have a lot of this in the background, and so just throwing out some ideas here. Working with the cities are moving towards green building codes and trying to improve their environmental standings. If they were to embrace, for example, water use efficiency standards by having, a policy statement about valuing sustainability and the importance of water conservation to achieve sustainability as well as support existing customers as well as future development, that could lend itself towards more progressive building codes that require water use efficiency retrofits on resale and some of these standards that we see in other cities. Fremont's been moving a bit towards there, but there's room here where the cities could be perhaps achieving some green initiatives of their own and implementing conservation on our behalf through just establishing some new policies. Also, there's a lot of move towards stormwater management. There's a lot of opportunity for that stormwater to help supplement groundwater recharge. There's things that the cities are doing. There's things that we're doing. If we come together and put some policies together, simple policies, we may be able to find greater alignment and simplification of things like CEQA processes locally. Our groundwater group may not have to spend so much time reviewing and commenting if some of their desires are captured in some of the city policies about respecting and protecting groundwater, valuing it, I should say. And we have these everywhere. We work with the Flood Control District and Army Corps in the flood control channel. We're all playing in the same sandbox. We've all got different objectives. There are the things we can do there to just meet and confer and get a better understanding of what each other's beneficial use of this facility is and how we can respect those better and try and take a more unified approach towards considering the other needs of the channel. Can we do a better job of considering flood management? Working with USD, our friends who were here earlier, maybe developing a vision or policy around to the future of recycled water, at least planning for it. County has stormwater, East Bay Parks, recreation, and overlaps with Quarry Lakes, Alameda Creek, Lake Del Valle. We have great operations out there, but sometimes we run into conflict of remembering what's the other person's interest here. Sometimes we forget those things. So there's opportunities here. And these are things that we don't really have in our existing background of planning. They exist here and there, but not in a constructive, conscientious manner. And you can go further. You can go to regional, we could do watershed considerations. If there are opportunities to work with our watershed partners, the cities on stormwater management and sediment control and things like that. They're interested in it, we're interested in it, are the things that can be improved if we work together. So this is an area for opportunity in our next planning update. So we're almost done. Wanted to just take a little time to discuss what are the things that board members here tonight think are drivers behind a need to update our plan. Laura, do you mind? I know Director Wong had submitted some comments for this discussion and I didn't print them out because I was in such a hurry. Do you think you can find those?
Yeah, I can. I think she sent them kind of for staff to consider. I'm sure if the board's interested, we can share those.
Thanks. So Director Wong had submitted a few thoughts on this slide in particular, but here's things that we see, when we're coming out to the board and talking about planning, here are the things that come up first in my mind. Obviously we're seeing declining of reliability of our imported supplies. That's obviously a driver. The new resource initiatives like IPR and Los Vaqueros, even Lake Del Val, these all are very challenging. They're not clean, square peg to fit in a square hole in our plans. They have unique offerings, unique potential. Some of them are not very feasible, frankly. Some of them are more feasible. And so I know I've watched this board grapple with these things and figuring out how do you compare these apples and oranges? We have the expanding water quality concerns. We've got the climate change uncertainty. This is frankly my biggest concern as a planner. What can we count on? Both from infrastructure as well as water supply. And acknowledging that, 2050, 30 years out, 30-year plan gets us to what appears to be a break point of when things are going to start getting much more uncertain. And do we want to have a two-stage plan to address the near term with a mind on the future? The regulatory uncertainty, financial pressure. What do we always hear? What's the business case? What's the cost? What's the business case? Of course, it's always top of mind. And then that stakeholder list. What is our community's thrust? If we, when we bring them in here, what are they interested in? Maybe they're completely chuffed with the job we're doing and say, carry on. But maybe they have some real input. And this board needs to know that before making tough decisions that impact rates and maybe are controversial. So those are the things that come to my mind. And so I wanted to just try and open up a bit of discussion amongst the board of what are the drivers? What are the things that you feel are most important for us to be focused on? It can be stuff from here or other things.
When we started Director Gunther, did you have any comments?
Well, I think climate change, it's real. We're gonna have to deal with it. It certainly could impact almost everything we do. But we can't lose sight of, and the environmental aspects that come with that. We're gonna have to figure out a way to deal with that. And I don't think the government, I use that term loosely around us because we're affected by the government. We can't forget we're a regulatory agency too. But, we're seeing it with the emerging regulatory requirements in the PFAS area. The fish, everybody's all over everywhere targeting their one little entity. And I don't know if we can do it, but I think we need to stop looking at one little entity and start looking at the whole. One salamander shuts down a project that will benefit all the others. And it's shocking. And that's the kind of world we're in. And the staff does a great job with that. I don't think the public fully understands So how some of this stuff really works. Sometimes the more you know, the more you're upset, the more you're angry. And believe me, I love the salamander. But what are they thinking? And I see that coming with climate change, because that little salamander is going to be climate change. It's going to affect them. And it's not just going to affect them, it's going to affect another one, it's going to affect another one and another one. That's where we're really going to get hit. And people don't care about reliability until you don't have it. One day you wake up and suddenly it's a crisis. You know, we're getting through this drought. Why? Because we planned. Our staff planned. Our boards ahead of us planned. ESAL plant was already in the works before I got on this board. State water, same thing. Fish, not really. It was there, sort of. But you know, we take one hurdle after the next, And it's interesting how Director Sethy said, meetings used to be full. Now there aren't, you know, where is everybody? We're even online. Nobody here unless we want to do a huge rate increase. And then the ones that are here are kind of like, well, you can't do that because they're never here. So a lot of it's about messaging. I think we've done a great job. Messaging, intertwining with all this. I see climate change as a problem. We're just gonna keep nibbling at it and nibbling at it and nibbling at it. And if regulatory uncertainty, absolutely.
What I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Director Akbari?
So I like this list as is. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add. One thing that I might suggest, and I actually don't know if it actually belongs on this list, but potential short-term sources of supply to respond to any kind of emergency, whether it be a seismic event or a fire, just being able to prepare for that. But I feel like that kind of falls under the risk category, not entirely certain.
We're talking very, how to define short term. What is short term?
In case our imported sources of supply can no longer be accessed.
So when we talk planning, short term can be 10 years. So
Right.
are we talking a month, or Director Weed brought up the topic of a 6-month disruption, for example?
I think that'd
Is
be
that what we're
a fair
thinking
timeline.
about?
Yeah, I'd be more thinking about a 6-month-ish timeline rather than 10 years when I say short term. But otherwise, I feel like the topics that we've covered and discussed are pretty comprehensive. So I don't know that I have more to add than that.
In the event of a super flood, we will have too much water,
Yeah.
but at the same time, the delta may be cut off from us for a period of time. Same with an earthquake on the Hayward Fault. I miss somebody like Frank John on our team. And I think education is going to be more important than ever over the next 3 decades. And I feel like we need somebody who will engage directly with the schools on developing programs that reflect the water industry and what we do as a district. So it's not the entertainment type of stuff that we were doing in the past. This is serious education where we get into the science classes, or we offer online classes that are available that we can be promoted in the schools, things like that, where you have different lecturers, and we have materials that are available from Aqua, from CSDA, that are good resources if we were to pull it together. So you have community input here. I'm looking at it from the other aspect that we really need promote the education of our community. That's how you develop participation.
Putting that into a driver, you're feeling there's a lack of an understanding on or education about water supply.
Serious education.
Mhm.
You know, Washington, we do a great job in the Tri-City Voice with our ACWD connections. I actually developed that idea early on the board. And I look at what Washington Hospital does in the Tri-City Voice.
Mm.
They are helping to educate the community every single week. And we don't have to go to maybe that, full page type stuff, but maybe once in a while a supplement, it goes into the local newspaper, or we put a program together that's on our local public station. That's one thing. Number two, when I was at that Special District Leadership Foundation seminar last week, we each had to work on, we were divided into 6 teams where we had to work on a problem that's facing our district. So our team decided that staffing in the industry is a major issue moving forward. That unless we're developing the right resources, we spent an hour on that problem and had to come up with recommendations. So it really boiled down to workforce development. And I think that's going to be a challenge for us moving forward.
These are interesting, definitely appropriate things to be incorporated into a 30-year plan. Definitely stretching the envelope, but I can certainly see ways that we can incorporate some of the significance of these things into a water supply master plan.
Yeah, well, graying of the industry is occurring before us right now, and there's a lot of turnover. And
I don't take that too personal.
Hey, it's on my head too here. So, but workforce development is going to be a key moving forward.
Yeah, definitely.
So those are 2 that come to mind.
All right, thank you. Dr. Wong had some comments. We'll make mine and then we'll read hers into the record. I would take exception to your first position that continued decline in imported water supplies. There's a developing water market and water transfers. 40%, over 40% of the state's water goes to agriculture, which is less than 3% of the state's economy. Another 50+% goes to the environment. So over time and the financial structure is such that at best the farmers talk in terms of hundreds of dollars per acre foot, we're talking thousands of dollars per acre foot. Disparity is 10 to 100 times for the value of the same water. Sigma is creating the basis for a water market in agriculture as it gets into the granular level and comes up with a valuation per well. So I believe we can have an opportunity for a significant increase in imported water supply that can be dialed in on an on-demand basis.
In terms of, we're talking like market forces.
Free developing the water market.
End the subsidies of water and develop free markets in water trade.
Free marketing. An example, recent thing, grasslands as part of the Los Vaqueros project is going to receive 43,000 acre feet of water, which is high quality state water. They don't need high quality state water. They were, in our visit down there, they say they could accept water with 2,500 TDS, total dissolved solids. The ability to find other drainage from the San Joaquin Valley to meet the grass in lieu of not releasing that 43,000 acre feet of really good quality water, which could be utilized by the participants of the Los Vaqueros project. So that, and it expands from there. Additional, so I would not take it as a point that we're going to lose imported water as a supply. I would hope that we would have a chapter on contingencies. And it has to be a period of, in part because of its resource planning, a period of at least 6 months of loss of any or all of our water supply systems and how we would address it. And that may lead us to some operational changes, putting in the ability to transfer water from one part of the district to another to operate independently. Recognizing that in a contingency, our job is to provide fire flows and sanitary flows. It's the health department that's primarily responsible for potable water, not us. So that is a basis, but I think we will provide that potable water to everyone if at all possible. So, and when you think in terms of contingencies, it's not just the water supply element, it's the entire restructuring an entire entity and repurposing personnel. You have all the resources you can gainfully employ. We have yet to structure a concept of how we can gainfully employ and a 100-fold increase in our operational base. That is what the challenge is. Water supply is only part of that. But it's a district-wide and includes every operational unit within the district.
And there's the nexus in the master plan. I definitely see how that fits in.
So,
But again,
those,
the plan starts here, and as we mentioned last time, this plan will have to be integrated into all the sub plans, which would then have that implementation.
conservation as a way of life is not something I support. I think it is something you turn on and off. It's should least cost water supply in a drought or a contingency. But water is a great thing. You should encourage people to use it when it's available. And when we have a problem, whether it be a drought or a contingency operation, and conservation is one way you can do it. Water use efficiency is a hardened approach and reduces your demand overall. And making an understanding that there's a distinction between the two is important. The most graphic explanation description of that is a low volume toilet is water efficiency, not flushing after every use is water conservation. It's a matter of behavior, which is modified and can be changed. And we've had extraordinary response and success. And it's something we can put into a plan, we can quantify and put into a planning mode. So thank you. Those are my basic thoughts. Director Wong had some comments and
Actually, I wanted to just two things. One, Director Weed, and for the clarification, when we talk about declines in important supplies, we're talking about allocations from our contracts. So I definitely noted, I definitely agree with your vision on water markets. I definitely believe that's where we're going, but just to be clear, we're talking about the allocations that we can not have to go out and scrabble for and try and pick up. So I want to just be clear, a distinction there.
my point being that you can quantify anticipated conservation as a water supply element.
The latter comment, I want to go to the top. Yeah, so to understand what the first bullet is, just clarifying what we
On the
mean
very
by-
first bullet,
Yeah,
yes,
by
that
decline
would
in
be
imported
to
supplies,
include
we mean our allocations are going down, and that's all.
allocations going to, but in the sense that we're getting imported water, that we need to include that as a part of that we're going to offset it by being able to purchase additional water. We have the capacity.
Correct. To
It's not a
do
capacity
transfers,
limitation.
purchases and transfers on spot markets, things like that. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And I want to be clear, you did say you don't like conservation as a way of life. Are you suggesting that we don't comply with the efficiency standards, that we shouldn't?
I say we
prioritize
look
them?
at it as water use efficiency as a way of life.
Just terminology.
And the conservation is something that is
An emergency
malleable.
response. Yeah, just want to make sure we're clear on what the record
Yes.
says.
And it's not something that you should, and hopefully it's not something that becomes hardened, that but we've had extraordinary success with voluntary support of conservation. When we talk about mandatory restrictions, we had no enforcement problems at all in the last drought, nor have we had in this drought. We've had 100% compliance.
Let me add one point to Director Weed's comments. I sent this earlier this fall to our general manager, I think Mr. Wunderlich as well. But there is a NASDAQ spot water index.
Yeah.
And John and I were present with the two founders of the company that created that several years back. And it's slowly taken off. And this summer, we saw spot prices reach, I think, close to $3,000 an acre foot, briefly in August.
Quite that high, but it definitely spikes, yeah.
For a farmer that's using $30 an acre foot, $3,000 becomes a very enticing market for them to participate in.
Understood, yeah. Well, we monitor that index all the time. We use it referentially whenever we're doing dry year purchase evaluation.
Well,
But
if you're thinking longer term, I would actually entertain the idea of using that spot market to sell water from semi-tropic
I
in times of great need,
understand where you're going.
because we could make a very nice profit for our ratepayers here in the district.
I would echo the point, and whether it fits into the IRP or not, and maybe it should, we're an enterprise district, and water trading is an enterprise option which is available to us as a financial resource.
Yeah, I do hear from comments received tonight. Can I consolidate a few things? Earlier, we talked about the significance of financial solvency, to have the sort of the power to move, to leverage money, to implement things as needed. That there's a value to maintaining that. I'm hearing definitely the evolving water markets is going to be part of water resources management, but should we not be looking at ways to be opportunistic with that in a way that's beneficial to us? And the nexus here is that when we've discussed these things in the past, the position of the balance of the board has been what our policies say about the purpose for banked water, which is about reliability, but not necessarily the other benefits of financial solvency, rate stabilization, and some of the other potential benefits. So I do see there's an opportunity in a planning study to open up an objective here that is a broader look at non-water benefits that are largely in that sort of monetary fund. I don't really know where I'm going here, but
Well,
I'm
you could
definitely
say-
hearing these things coming together and trying to figure out how we can put our arms around that as something to incorporate into planning to open up that avenue for us in the future. And I'm sure there's a way to do it.
Well, you could say your strategy is this fundamental policy, that's your ground rule. But you can also act tactically, from time to time, given the amount of water you have stored away and everything. We were up to, I think, 140 or 160,000 acre feet in semi-tropic.
Wish we were there now, but yeah.
But that's a 4-year supply of water.
So 14.
Absolutely.
14.
And to run with where you're thinking, we could buy cheap wet year water and supplement that supply and hold on to it. So we have the opportunity to have more water for water supply reliability plus other opportunities. These are certainly things we can include into our master planning. There's no question about it. In fact, we've had these discussions during the past drought as well. Director Sethy, when did you join our board?
If I wasn't on the board, I was probably in the audience.
I'm sure you were. So I'm just trying to figure if you were there or over here. Director Akbari, you definitely were. But we looked at opportunities to say, can we leverage those assets to bring in water we couldn't use that had the potential to bring in financial relief for the benefit of our community to lower drought rates. So we have looked at those things in the past, and admittedly, our own internal priorities and planning did become the barriers for us to make a clean decision on how to proceed. And so I think this is definitely an area for discussion for a planning document.
We still need to hear from Director Wong's.
All right, I'll go back, Director, please.
All right, I'm happy to share what Director Wong shared with us. She said, I think the slide covered most of my concerns, and it was this slide. Water quality, water supply reliability, affordability are my main concerns. And she also said at the next workshop, we can drill down to my specific concerns such as local supply reliability, cost of additional water treatment due to emerging contaminants, the ultimate cost of state water project, and the need to have a plan B if state water project is no longer reliable. So that was the balance of her comments. And thank you, and with her name, Judy.
Fine. All right. At this time, may ask if there's anyone who wishes to address the board on the items on our agenda. All right, is there anyone online that is wishing to do so? Please raise your hand. I see no hands being raised. Thank you.
Great. So with that, we'll move on. Great discussion, by the way. I think we got a lot to build off of sort of our launching for where we're going next, which I'd like to make a recommendation for. My recommendation is that we break this up into two phases. First phase is to do a scoping phase. And what that looks like to me is we bring on a consultant who has experience in integrated planning, working with boards, with knowledge of doing public outreach and establishing objectives and goals. A lot of the work we're working on right now, but to do that in a formal context that's needed to be the basis for that 30-year plan. And then as a second phase would be to develop the actual plan based on input from phase one. What I'm getting at is, and I hinted at this earlier on in this evening, we could go down a path of addressing small deficiencies that we're seeing, or we could really broaden it to be more inclusive. We have the community input requirement that is really critical for a 30-year plan, to have a robust opportunity for the public to comment. Maybe they won't comment, but we need to make that opportunity available and document what we've done. And so I feel that a first scoping phase with a specialist will help us figure out how to launch into that next step, which is really the bulk of the work. So this is my recommendation for proceeding with an update to the plan. I would say last, I don't want to group these two things together because we don't know what's needed in the next stage. We don't know what type of specialists we're going to need. We could ask for a company that's got a deep bench of subcontractors and a wide range of things, and just kind of go with one contract right now. But I'd rather break it into a first phase, really get comfortable, get that public and community input, stakeholder group input, and then refine what it is we want to do before proceeding. So I'd like comments on the proposed approach, if any.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
I'm fine with, I have no.
I would just say, overall, for this presentation, it was a very good job.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think that I got a lot of great material. A lot of what I was expecting these discussions to go to over the past few months. I really appreciated the survey we did last time, the polling, and then the discussions we've had tonight. I think we got a lot of good material to really put something together, get going in earnest.
If you offer us a good reward in the future, I'm sure you'll get more.
This is being recorded.
I'm not asking for bribes.
Right.
Thank you.
So I guess.
Is there any other? Okay.
Unless we need any other direction now, I know we have additional installments of this series coming up, so stay tuned.
All right. We have thank you very much for your presentation. Next, we have a general manager report, which is item 5.
Yeah, and I just have one quick report. It's really to ping the board. There's an opportunity for one additional director to attend a joint presentation by the state water contractors and Delta Conveyance Authority at the Aqua meeting, at the Aqua conference coming up. We can send up to 2 directors. Director Sethy's on board already. I wanted to see whether now Director Weed, I think you've indicated you've been to that similar presentation in the past.
I have
have-
two. So
Have you made it in the past? Okay,
Now, I would point out that this will be a little over 1% will probably be approaching $200 million investment on the
I
part
know.
of the district. So any member that wishes to be briefed on where that money's going.
well, I'm getting briefed at every other meeting by the DCA
okay. So you
Executive
feel like you're
Director
probably
on
pretty up to
the
speed.
Finance Authority.
Right. Okay,
And we have our meeting tomorrow.
okay. So then you feel like both seats are
I'm
open
up to
to
speed and I would
directors,
welcome other directors. to
Akbari and
become
Gunther. Okay, great.
informed.
Well, they're
I-
open and available.
I do want to go. I need to check.
Okay,
I believe I will be,
okay,
but if not, then
okay.
I would love to go, but I think my flight is several hours away from that time frame of that specific meeting. So
All right. Well, we can just have staff just rain on that presentation and tell you all about it later. If you change your mind, it sounds like we've got 2 seats available, so they're open, and just let me know so that I can make sure that you're being RSVP'd for.
We can back to the staff.
We can actually send staff. There's no limit on staff because really the limit on what
What's the
directors can
quorum?
participate is a Brown Act issue.
I will check in.
Okay,
I might actually check. You know, it's just a
All right.
matter of moving something back, perhaps maybe
sure.
works
All right.
tough, but maybe I'll be able to.
Yeah,
open
sure.
something up.
Let me
Okay,
know.
just-
I will try to fit in if there's no.
Okay.
All
All right, so if directors Akbari and Gunther could let me know, maybe sometime early next week, if possible, by early next week, that'd be great. And then I'll let you know if there's an opening. Sounds good. And that was my only general manager's report.
Thank you. Next, we have director's comments and or agenda item request.
For me.
None present.
Good.
Then if there's no other items before the board, we are adjourned.
Okay.
All right, it's
Thank you.
6:46 PM. Thank you.